Hi, I'm Mary Pettigrew, and I'm part of the communication team with Empower Our Future. And I am delighted to welcome you all to, I think this is our 12th Empower Hour. And I'm really excited to introduce Suzanne Jones, Executive Director of Boulder County's nonprofit recycler, EcoCycle. You, of course, have probably heard Zan's name. She was a two-term Boulder City Council member and mayor for the last 4 years of her term. She's got a long history of civic service and nonprofit management, including running the regional office of the Wilderness Society, where she worked for 16 years. She's made a career of environmental conservation and climate change advocacy, including helping to pass numerous conservation bills through Congress and serving on an advisory council to the governor on forest health issues. She's worked to improve management of oil and gas development and exploring ways communities can combat climate change. One thing folks might not know about Zan, you probably always wondered, how is it that she stays so youthful? Well, she's been an ultimate Frisbee player, competitive ultimate Frisbee player for 25 years. That probably has something to do with it. She believes in working hard and playing hard. It helps her stay fired up. When asked what one thing folks could do for the environment, she suggested working at two levels, both levels. Fight the status quo for system change, but also be creative at the local level with neighbors and friends, helping to implement real solutions. So she suggests that we are both warriors and creators for the future. Really excellent advice. And tonight, Zan is joined by EcoCycle Community Education and Engagement Manager and Eco Leader Network Manager, Rosie Briggs. You may have seen Rosie digging soil samples in your garden. She's truly out in the field, and she loves it because she gets to interact with literally hundreds of concerned and active citizens in her job every day. She says there's no doubt in her mind that we have the people power to achieve what we need to achieve. And her ask, if people were going to do one thing for the environment, she said, to remember that environmentalism means fighting for equity. And when we help lift people up, we really help the environment and vice versa. So on that inspiring note, I'll turn it over to Rosie and Zan. And again, thanks to everybody who is here.
Thank you so much, Mary. It is a pleasure to be here. And I think I'll just jump right in by sharing my screen here. So give me 1 second. All righty. I really appreciate being here tonight and that honored that EcoCycle was invited to do an Empower Hour. You guys are an influential bunch, and it's great to have this conversation with you. I've been in my position as executive director for about 8 years. And when my predecessor, Eric Lombardi, first recruited me to this position, I said, you know, I don't really want to work on zero waste. I want to work on climate. And he's like, oh my God, this job is all about climate. You have to come and do this. This is exactly why we do the work we do. And so I took the job, and I've been trying to elbow my way to the climate solution table ever since. In part because a lot of people, I think, don't make the connection between recycling and composting and climate solutions. So that's what we want to talk about tonight. In terms of the arc of this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the connection between zero waste and climate and dig a little deeper on plastics, and then talk about what we're doing about it, both recycling and composting, and then sort of end up with what we're doing more locally and how you guys can all be a part of that. First, a shout out about, well, to all my colleagues at EcoCycle. It is an honor to represent their collective experience and knowledge. And there's about 65 of us who've been doing this work, and EcoCycle turned 45 this year, and that's a lot of history in this city, in this community, and We are, as noted, one of the largest nonprofit recyclers in the country, and we first brought curbside recycling to Boulder some 20 years ago. 45 years ago. It was one of the first 20 programs in the country, and since then we've been helping to build zero waste communities ever since, including by being engaged in just about every aspect of zero waste. And so we do everything from run the Boulder County Recycling Center. We founded it and run the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials out at 6400 Arapahoe or Charm. We teach in all the public schools in Boulder Valley and St. Vrain Valley school districts. We're down at the state legislature advocating for policy change. And we also work with cities across Colorado and beyond to move up the zero waste ladder, and we engage citizens in all aspects of that. So that's how we do what we do. And our mission and how we operate is to try out solutions here in Boulder County, refine them, and then ripple them out into the world in hopes of a more sustainable, equitable, and climate resilient future. So that's who we are and what we're doing. And diving right into the topic, you may have heard on a recent NPR story, it was with the author of The Day the World Stopped Shopping, that 70% of our nation's GDP is based on consumption. And we're in this real dilemma where the planet desperately needs us to stop shopping, and our economy depends on us shopping even more than ever. And so it isn't surprising in that context that ICLEI recognizes zero waste, which includes recycling, composting, and waste reduction, as one of the fastest, easiest, and most cost-effective short-term climate solutions. So that's what we're going to talk about. Obviously, there's other important solutions, and you guys work on many of them, but zero waste needs to be a part of the mix. So let's dig a little deeper into the ways that recycling and composting intersect with climate. First off is when we make new products from recycled materials, we save energy, and energy reduces fossil fuel use. So this energy savings from recycling is actually quite large and one of the biggest impacts of zero waste. The second way is when we put organics, and that includes yard waste, that includes food waste, and that includes paper and cardboard, anything out of fiber. When we put that into a landfill, and it basically rots without, it's buried, so it's without oxygen, and so it creates methane, and that is an incredibly potent greenhouse gas. So when we stop putting things in landfill, we can actually address that issue. And then the third way is that if we take these organic materials, and instead of burying them in a landfill where they create methane, if we compost them, we can create this rich soil amendment. And when we apply that to the landscape, we enrich the soil, we grow healthier plants that can then photosynthesize and draw even more CO2 out of the atmosphere and store it in the soil safely where it belongs. And in that way, we are transforming what is a real climate problem, the creation of methane, into a really powerful climate solution. So let me go just a bit deeper on each one of these points. This chart shows the energy saved when we make materials out of recycled materials rather than extracting new raw resources from around the world. And so you can see that alumina has a very, very high percentage, 92% of the energy is saved when you make a new aluminum can out of an old aluminum can, instead of going to mine bauxite ore in the rainforest. And so it goes for lots of the other materials, as you can see. Glass, which is one of the lower ones, is still 34% energy savings, and those really add up to be a significant amount. On the methane side of things, I wanted to highlight this because this was a big topic at COP26, where they recognized reducing methane is a major and an immediate priority. The IPCC recognized that methane is responsible for a significant portion of the 1C warming that we are experiencing, and landfills are the third largest source of human created methane. So addressing landfill, putting organics in landfills is a really straightforward way to stop creating more methane, and is a huge priority. And then lastly, digging a little deeper into composting. There's some really powerful work that was done in Marin County around carbon farming. And what they found was if you take what is a relatively small amount of compost, a ½ inch, and you put it on degraded rangeland in California, this is where that work was done, it would not only significantly transform the health of the landscape, but it would also greatly enhance the soil's carbon sequestration capacities. And so when you look at scaling up something like this, the savings is quite significant. And we've been working with CSU, CU, Mad Ag, Boulder County, City of Boulder on trialing the Marin County findings here in Boulder and figuring out what works for our landscapes, our climate, our soils in terms of enhancing climate sequestration. So all of these savings really add up. I'll note that in California, which was one of the first states to regulate greenhouse gas emissions back in 2006, one of the first things they chose to do was to make recycling mandatory for businesses. And they saw that as basically the lowest hanging fruit that they could take to address climate, which indicates just how powerful it is. And since then, they've also added composting. I'll also just note that recycling and composting are really cost-effective solutions. And again, this is data from California, and they found that giving out recycling and composting loans was one of the cheapest ways they could reduce greenhouse gas emissions compared to other programs like solar panels and transportation, which doesn't mean those other things aren't important. Obviously they are, but zero-waste solutions are using known technology, are very accessible, and we could be implementing these things now. And this chart talks about the potential, the 2020 column there talks about how much the greenhouse gas footprint is right now of recycling and composting in Colorado. Even though we have an abysmal recycling rate of 15%, it still results in 1.9 million metric ton equivalent of CO2 savings, equivalent to about 400,000 cars being taken off the road annually, and so on. If we actually were meeting our goals, you can see how much more greenhouse gas savings we could be doing. And if we, hit the EPA's national goal of 50%, it would be significant and laudable if we could do that. So it's just worth noting, zero waste matters. It adds up. Let me just go off on a slight little tangent, and that is that a lot of folks will raise the question, yeah, but don't you spend a lot of energy when you go and collect all the recyclables and the composting? And the answer is, yeah, it does take a little bit of energy, but it pales in comparison to the energy savings from recycling. And this is data from Oregon TEQ, and they did an equivalency which says, for example, you'd have to ship truck plastics over 40,000 miles before the energy used to collect them is more than the energy saved in recycling. So just wanted to put that out there. It's an interesting thing to think about, but it's definitely worth collecting them. And which doesn't mean, that we wouldn't want to get rid of a diesel truck. So I did want to announce here that EcoCycle is going to acquire the first ever electric powered compost collection truck in the country in this coming year. And I thought this would be a good group to announce that to. We haven't done press yet because hopefully we're getting a demonstration truck soon, and that will make for better press. But we got an alternative fuels Colorado grant to help cover some of the costs to buy this truck. These things aren't cheap, but we hope it's one of the first dominoes to fall in greening up the whole waste industry and getting the industry to slowly convert to electric vehicles. But we're very excited about this. We're still fundraising for the truck and for the solar to support it, but it's an exciting project. Okay, but back to zero waste climate. You'll note that even though the savings from recycling and composting are significant and measurable, they aren't often seen in most cities' climate action plans. And there's a good reason for that, and it has to do with conventional greenhouse gas accounting. You draw a bubble over your city, and you measure what's created and used within that bubble, but it doesn't count things that cross over that boundary. And so it ignores essentially the clothes you're wearing, the food you ate, the computer you're using, the bike you rode, the car you drove, because most of those things are not made within the city limits. It also doesn't, conventional greenhouse gas accounting doesn't measure the savings when instead of burning fuel, you actually use solar panels, or instead of throwing something out, you recycle it. So this is a problem with our greenhouse gas, the limits of our greenhouse gas accounting, which leaves zero waste solutions often out of the mix. And of course, if you're not measuring it, you often aren't able to manage it. You know the saying, but it's significant. And according to the EPA, 42% of our emissions in the United States comes from our stuff and our food. So how we produce it, consume it, and dispose of it. So it's a significant amount of emissions to leave out of a climate action plan. And we call these our consumption emissions. Here's another way of looking at greenhouse gas accounting. One of the things that I want to give kudos to Boulder for, and there's a lot of things we could give kudos to Boulder for, is that Boulder recognizes the limits of conventional greenhouse gas accounting and is trying to figure out how to do more fuller accounting. And they did an urban metabolism study by Metabolic, and they found that the embodied emissions of our consumption are larger than all other sources of our emissions together. So let that sink in. It doesn't mean transportation and energy and heating aren't important. They're hugely important, but our consumption of all the stuff in our food is even more. And so I guess when you think about it, it's not surprising that's true of most major cities. And indeed, there was a C4 Cities report that talked about the carbon footprint of the world's biggest cities is 60% larger than previously estimated when you include all the products and services consumed. So we need to make sure that these solutions are at the table, even if we have to go beyond our conventional accounting methods. And I'll just note that the EPA's WARM model, you guys have probably heard of it, is a way to start getting at some of these emissions. And again, because it's hard to account for, one of the ways we often talk about it is in equivalencies. And so you'll see here, we talk about how many cars, our recycling and composting in Boulder is equivalent to taking 28,000 cars off the road for a year. So you'll see in Colorado, that's 400,000 cars and so on. So it's not nothing. It's important, and we want to build on it, but it's not enough. And so I want to talk, before I get, I'm going to talk in a minute about what we're doing about it, but let's talk plastics in a little more detail, because there's a lot of focus on that. And I think no material better demonstrates our overconsumption and the life cycle impacts that need to be addressed than plastics. As you probably know, most plastics come from fracked glass. Many plastics are only used for a few minutes, as is the case with single-use disposable plastics, and then they're thrown away. But they're a forever material. Plastics doesn't really go away; it just breaks into smaller and smaller microplastics, which cycle through our system and our bodies in pretty scary ways. And you guys have probably seen these statistics, but the vast majority of plastics are not recycled, and the vast majority of the ones that have been made have not been recycled. At the rate we're going to end up with more plastic in the ocean than fish. That's a stat that's often cited and is particularly scary. And even worse, the oil and gas industry, as they're falling out of favor as a fuel source with the rise of renewables, they have indicated that they're going to double down on plastic production as a way to maintain their market value. And they are on pace to quadruple production by 2050. The problem with all of this, well, keep going. The other thing is the greenhouse gas impacts of plastics is huge. And it is estimated that U.S. plastic industry releases as much greenhouse gas emissions as 116 coal-fired power plants, which would put it as number 5 of plastics for a country. So this is a huge, it also has a huge equity footprint. A vast majority of the pollution coming from plastics manufacturing is down in Louisiana, Texas, in poor BIPOC communities. So there's a lot of reasons to want to address plastics. I will say that the concern over plastics is great and is a momentum we're trying to harness for change. So one caveat I would put to that is people's concern about plastics recycling and the issues around that have caused people to question recycling in general. And I just want to address that myth with all of you that here in Boulder County, at the Boulder County Recycling Center, we process a lot of tons. We process all those single stream tons in the county and beyond. And plastics makes up 7 to 10% of those. And the problematic plastics, so the 3s, the 6s, and the 7s, are about 1 to 3% of the materials. So that doesn't mean they're not important, and we are addressing them, but just wanted to put it in perspective that there's a whole lot about recycling that works very, very well. But clearly, we need to be doing better and we need to be doing more. So how are we going to do that? It's not enough to just recycle more. I think this is a useful illustration in sort of visually giving you the sense of we've got to transform the system. The old system was take, make, waste. In other words, you dig up natural resources, you make stuff, and then you bury it in the ground when you're done. That is inefficient from an environmental and economic, and it's inefficient in all ways. Recycling adds some loops to that, and that is important. But the end goal is really circularity, like we see modeled in nature, where there really isn't waste in the system, and that involves really redesigning how we make things, how we think about using them, and what we do when we're done with them. And so that's really the vision. And I'll just say that even with circularity, it's good to be reminded of the zero waste hierarchy. And what's at the top is to reduce and conserve materials, use less. And waste reduction is by far the most important thing that we need to do. Recycling is an important part of all this in composting, but it is not the be all and end all. Even I say that even as a recycler. So that's good to keep in mind as we think about how we want to transform the system. So let's talk about how we're doing that. Each year for the past 5 years, EcoCycle and CoPERG release a statewide report called State of Recycling and Composting to take stock of how we're doing and how the different cities are doing and counties. And we release it on America Recycles Day. And there's some sobering news. As mentioned earlier, Colorado's pretty bad at recycling and composting. We're at 15%. That's less than half the national average. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is that we have some of the lowest landfill tip fees in the country, about $22 a ton compared to the national average of around 55. So we've got a lot of headwinds for sure, but there is some good news too that we can build upon. And that includes the fact that we are still, even with at 15%, we are having a measurable and important impact on greenhouse gas emissions and recycling materials. And importantly, there's leading communities in Colorado that are recycling over 50% and show what's possible. They're models for the rest of the state. And we, in this report every year, try to hold up the leaders so that it creates nice peer pressure on their neighboring cities, and it also inspires people to do better. And you'll note that Boulder, and you're probably not surprised that Boulder is the top city statewide, turns out with our 53% diversion rate, and other cities, I'll let you read the slide, are in the mix there. We also take a look statewide, and Aspen and Durango and Pickton County are doing well there as well. But the key takeaway and part of the solution is all of these lead cities have one thing in common, and that they all provide bundled curbside collections. We call it universal recycling. And what it means is that you automatically get recycling when you sign up for trash. So it's part of the package. It's bundled in the cost. You don't have to pay extra for it. And ideally, the pricing for these materials is based on the size of the trash can, and you pay more if you waste more, but the recycling and the composting are embedded. And so the takeaway from this, or the actionable item here, is that 6 out of 10 of Colorado's largest cities don't provide universal recycling to all their residents. So that's the low-hanging fruit to go after there. So that's one of the things we're looking at, is how do you make the solutions, recycling and composting, accessible to everyone and equitable, because if you live in an apartment building, in most places you don't have access to those services. So what we're doing about it, trying to rise the tide for all boats, is we've been down at the state legislature working on a series of bills. And I'll just quickly mention a few of the ones that we have recently passed. Back in 2019, we did pass the Front Range Waste Diversion Fund Act, and what it does is slightly increase a fee on each ton that's tipped at the landfill, and put that into a fund to give grants to Front Range communities, because those are the fees only on Front Range landfills, and it's made available to businesses, local governments, nonprofits, to help increase diversion rates. So that's up and running, and I serve on the board, and we're starting to give away more and more money to more and more communities that are wanting to change the status quo of how well they're doing. Another headwind we've addressed is we don't really have recycling end markets here in Colorado. We're kind of an island in the middle of the country, and so several other states have provided a model of creating a center in collaboration with their university and businesses to foster businesses that are going to use recycled materials that we collect here and use them to remanufacture other things. And so that's something that's in the works. A study was done, stakeholder work was done, and this year the CDPHE is going to run a bill to actually establish it. So that's exciting. It's a way to develop circularity here in Colorado. Right now, we only really have circularity for one major material, and that's glass. We're lucky to have businesses here that take all of our glass and turn it back into bottles. And so that's the kind of model we're trying to replicate for other materials. And then finally, another key aspect, and this gets at waste reduction, is this past year we passed the Plastic Pollution Reduction Act, which will ban polystyrene food and drink takeout containers and ban single-use plastic bags. Doesn't go into effect till 2024, but it's put everyone on notice that the change is coming. And it also removed the preemption that prevented local governments from going even further. So that, I think, is an important element. And again, we're trying to get at waste reduction. We're trying to develop markets for the materials that are recycled, and we're trying to make recycling systems work better, providing access to more of the population. So that's part of the vision. But even so, obviously, it's still not enough, because in our report that I mentioned we released, we basically, what we found over 5 years is we're at stagnated at 15% waste diversion. So what we are working with other folks on is to come up with a transformative policy. And that policy is called Extended Producer Responsibility. And we're hoping all of you are going to help us in passing this policy next legislative session. And basically what it does is it changes the responsibility to producers. So that's all the brands, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, blanking on all the other brands you can think of, that when they produce a product and put it out into the world, that they take responsibility for the full life cycle of the packaging that comes in. So whether it's a box, whether it's a drink container, and we're also including in that printed paper. So we have been a part of a conversation to see how to bring this policy here to Colorado. And one of the reasons we know it will work, or that it's possible, is it's something that is adopted across the European Union and in Canada. And just this past year, Oregon and Maine adopted EPR. So we know it works, and it is a growing, there's a lot of momentum in large part, I think, driven by the concern around plastics. And the brands like Coca-Cola are feeling a lot of pressure to do something about it, to help change the system, because they are labeled as the worst plastic polluter right now globally. So they are interested and at the table to help make some change. And there's a lot of benefits to moving to producer responsibility from, well, as you might imagine, it will end up reducing climate pollution, because it's going to be much more efficient and provide access to all residents, provide access to recycling, both urban and rural. It will transfer the responsibility for paying for these systems from local governments and all of us who have to pay for them in our monthly recycling trash bill. It will transfer that to the producers, and they will fund the systems, the collection and processing systems. And it will address equity issues for apartment buildings by ensuring that they have services as well, develop a common list of materials. And because producers will be paying into the system based on each bottle or piece of packaging they produce, it will create incentives for them to use less packaging, to make sure they're using recyclable packaging or compostable packaging, and that they use less toxic materials. So that's the vision, and there's a lot going on around it. This is how it works, but it's kind of complicated. So if y'all want to know, we can talk about it in questions. But where things stand is that a study was done last year that came out in July by CDPHE to study what it could look like here. There's been an extensive stakeholder process. We have 2 champions in the state legislature that are drafting legislation to introduce as one of the first bills. And we are part of a national discussion, because California, Washington, New York, and Vermont are also all tackling or having similar conversations this legislative session as well. So stay tuned, get involved. This is a big deal, a transformative way to tackle overconsumption. On the compost front, I guess I don't want to leave that out. There's a lot of interest and growing interest in dealing with organic waste, creating compost, and using it as part of regenerative ag, and it's very exciting. And we've been dealing with that at the state level as well. We were able to pass, with a lot of partners, a voluntary soil health program for Colorado, which is a first step. And it also got funded. The Colorado Department of Ag got some money to begin helping farmers implement soil health practices. So we're sort of getting composting and soil health on the radar for the agricultural industry here in Colorado is a good path forward. And then there is a pending statewide organics management plan that CDPHE and the Colorado Department of Ag are doing as we speak. That should be done this coming summer, and it's supposed to look at all the different feedstocks where organic waste is coming from food waste to manure to yard waste to wildfire mitigation, and also gaps in compost infrastructure, and there are plenty of gaps, and make recommendations about how, as a state, we can provide more infrastructure to compost and get that integrated into our agricultural system. So a lot of exciting stuff is happening on that front as well. There's also a lot happening nationally. So real briefly, I will say that in order to have more influence over some of the national discussions that are happening, EcoCycle founded the Alliance of Mission-Based Recyclers, also known as AMBER, with 3 other of the original nonprofit community recyclers around the country. There's only a few of us left, and you can see them there on the map. It's Ecology Center in Berkeley, Eureka in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, and Ann Arbor Recycle Ann Arbor. And we are part of an alliance where we have a lot of credibility because we all run recycling centers. We've been doing this for years, so we can come to the table and really advocate for authentic, transparent, real recycling. Call, if I may say, bullshit on some of the claims by producers about stuff that they wish was recyclable that really isn't, and really try to push the national dialogue. And one of the ways we're doing that is we are members of the U.S. Plastics Pact that Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the World Wildlife Fund are running to really bring all the brands to the table and move forward with goals to phase out toxic plastics and single-use disposables and really up recycling nationally for the resins that are really recyclable, like PET. So that's an exciting thing that's happening. And I'll also just note at the national level, we are seeing more action on national legislation than all of our years of being. There's at least 10 active bills at the federal level. And nobody's, holding their breath for Congress to suddenly, adopt all these things. But I will note that $300 million in grants to support recycling was just passed as part of the infrastructure bill. 2 other bills that we'd like to highlight are the Compost Act, which is a $2 billion grant program to expand composting infrastructure and reduce food waste and provide incentives for farmers. So composting, again, has got national attention as an important solution. And then Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is notable because it's a very comprehensive bill, both to curb plastic production, increase plastic recycling, and it's looking at the full life cycle of plastic, not just what we do with, what ends up in the bin, but how do we reduce it in the first place? And while it's not likely to pass in total, it's a useful blueprint for how we can move forward, and certainly pieces of it are actionable. So this is really exciting time. But bringing it back home as we come down the home stretch here, there's a lot happening in Boulder. And I want to, again, acknowledge that Boulder is thinking much, as it redoes its climate action plan, it's really taking a deeper look around circularity and looking more fully at the issue, and zero waste is part of that. So more locally, we're working on a few things I want you guys to be aware of. One is compost and carbon farming. We want to create a circular economy around compost here. Food waste and yard waste is heavy stuff that shouldn't be transported far. It should be composted here locally and used locally on our soils to help be part of our climate solution. And so that's the vision. EcoCycle has been engaging residents in doing carbon farming in their own backyards. And we are just finishing up a 3-year study about doing different applications of compost to measure the change in soil carbon sequestration. So that's exciting, and it's a way of getting people to know their soil and to understand their role in the circularity of food and growing food and maintaining soil health and so on. So that's exciting. After the big debacle with the county failing to site a regional compost facility, we all kind of took a deep breath and said, you know what? Citing big facilities is hard. Let's demonstrate this technology and also engage people in a distributed system at different scales, at schools, on farms, and so forth. And so people can understand compost, understand it's not this scary, smelly, icky thing, but it's really this wonderful soil amendment that is part of growing healthy food for you to eat. So we are working with several farmers and other entities, growing gardens, Jack's Solar Garden, to do two types of demos. One is to show how to make compost using the same sort of technology that was proposed at the county facility, but much smaller scale. So this picture is of an aerated static pile. And then also doing carbon farming, showing people what happens when you apply it to the ground and what a difference it makes in terms of plant growth. So that's something that we're very involved in, and you'll be hearing more about that from EcoCycle. And then also wanted to say on the recycling side, Boulder's doing pretty good, right? We're the best in the state, but we're at 53% waste diversion, and the lead cities in the country are in the 70s. So we're not as good as we can or should be. And so it's useful to think about what would be next steps here. And I would argue that waste reduction is the lens we should be looking through, and that can take many forms. One of them is getting our handle on food waste. And you probably know from reading the Drawdown book that food waste is the #3 solution that they recommend in terms of the biggest impact on climate is to quit wasting food. It's it's scary that when you look at the stats, 1/3 of all food that's grown never makes it into somebody's mouth. And those wasted greenhouse gas or energy has a huge greenhouse gas footprint. So that's one area that's ripe for Boulder action. Another is in our building codes. There's some simple things like adopting a hail-resistant shingle ordinance. A huge amount of roofs are redone each year just because of hailstorms. Lafayette actually adopted an ordinance without any public comment, believe it or not. Boulder could do this. Well, we probably can't do it without public comment. But what I meant was nobody showed up because it wasn't controversial. And then single-use plastics. Again, so we've done some great progress at the state level, but we could do more now that the preemption is being lifted here locally. So those are some ideas. But I want to now hand it to Rosie for the last 3 slides and sort of transition to, I've been talking about system change, but there's also other ways that we can all contribute. So let me hand it to Rosie to take us, to close us out here.
All right, I will keep it quick because we have questions and we want to answer those questions. But I just, as Mary said in the beginning, I do a lot of the mobilization and education and engagement for the general public. And with that, I walk a lot the line between this infrastructural policy stuff and individual actions, because people want to be empowered and they also feel guilty, but also they don't understand that it's this bigger thing. So this is a slide from a different webinar that I gave kind of about that. I could talk for 2 hours about that, but I won't today. And so basically environmental issues are typically framed as you know, in terms of individual responsibility. And you can see here the screenshot of Keep America Beautiful's crying Indian commercial that a lot of you probably know and or remember. And that was, I used that to illustrate the point that we have this kind of individual guilt and responsibility feeling about environmental issues because they did that on purpose. That was an intentional move. Keep America Beautiful was like an organization formed by the polluters that Zan listed earlier, like Coca-Cola and Dixie Cup and things like that. So I always like to stress pretty much whenever I talk about anything to anyone that the waste issue, as well as, you know, many other environmental issues, most other environmental issues are systemic. Climate change in general is driven by systems. That being said, the fault is not yours. And when I say that, I mean, like, if you don't refuse a straw when you get your smoothie, you are not the reason that we have a Pacific garbage patch, for example. If you order takeout and they give you a plastic fork, you're not the problem. You're not the reason we all have microplastics in our bodies, but you can make a positive impact as an individual. So by not fighting constantly against the infrastructure around you, you're not creating it, but you can do things to break out of it and form new systems that would benefit us all on the individual scale. Nice. Okay. So some options here. I included this quote from Margaret Mead that I say all the time: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed is the only thing that ever has." So I started out, this is a non-exhaustive list. So vote with your dollar, of course. When people opt away from single-use plastics, that not only, of course, saves that individual package from the landfill, from the ocean, wherever it was headed, but it also sends a market signal to those packagers that we have this new wave of consumerism that does reject that single-use plastic. And EcoCycle meets with those packagers and those producers all the time, and we hear them getting that feedback that we do have this new kind of era of consumerism which rejects single-use plastics. As a consumer, avoid plastic as much as you can. Again, you're set up to, as Zan said, the plastics industry, the oil and gas industry is specifically ramping up their plastics production. So it's not even a supply and demand issue, but the more you can opt out of that, the better, especially 3, 6s, and 7s. Those are the numbers that really are not realistic for recycling across the board, and they're really toxic both upstream and down. So 3 is PVC, 6 is polystyrene, and 7 is like other, it's like the catch-all. You can do a self-waste audit. That's something, EcoCycle has some tools online on our website for that. It's just something that's really helpful because a lot of times we are consuming something that we don't really need to be consuming in that form or with that package or at all, and we don't really realize, and it could just be like a really easy low-hanging fruit. Of course, recycle, as Zan said, even though when we look at the hierarchy of waste, recycle is on the bottom. We want to reduce and reuse. We also want to repair. We want to compost. We want to redesign. We want to repurpose. But as Zan said, with all of those statistics, recycling still makes a great deal of sense and you should still do it. Composting, again, is a very exciting thing to work on in terms of circular economy, in terms of active climate healing and waste disposal, and kind of in community engagement. So we can see carbon farming here. Our pilot for community carbon farming just finished up. It was 3 years long. And Mary was a carbon farmer. Susan was a carbon farmer. Paula was a carbon farmer. That's just off the top of my head who I'm seeing right now. But yeah, it was a great community engagement opportunity. We do have like a self-guided version of that on our website. You can repair. I saw Wayne was on this call with You Fix It. You Fix It is one of our favorite partners, of which we have many. So that's a great option as well. Buying local foods, of course, we were looking at that circular economy metabolic kind of graph drawing. That's a big part of it. Call your local recycler to figure out your own guidelines. If you don't live in Boulder County, you can find a local hard to recycle center. Again, if you don't live near EcoCycle's charm, and you can educate your friends and family and community. And so what part of what I do is running the Eco Leader network. Oh, I just froze. Nice, that's a really attractive face. There we go. So I run the Eco Leader network, which is more than 900 folks around Boulder County and Broomfield who I train on the guidelines, and then you spread the word either with the opportunities that I provide for the Eco Leaders or however you want. So you can email me after this, or you can sign up on our website. That's how EcoCycle was founded, really, is through that peer-to-peer outreach. So I just wanted to include some resources for my final slide so that you know what is at your at your fingertips. I lost the word that I was looking for. Don't dispose of them. So our website is ecocycle.org, but so we have so much on there. We're about to launch our new website, but it includes guidelines, frequently asked questions, how-tos like the self-audit that I described, like there's like how to quit plastics workbook. There's our A to Z guide. There's policy updates. So you can sign up to get, write your legislator, things like that. We also, in case you don't know, EcoCycle runs the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials. We call it the CHARM. It's at 6400 Arapahoe. We can take all kinds of things like mattresses and scrap metal and electronics. You can find our guidelines just at ecocycle.org/recycle, and that's something you can print out. You can hang it up above your bin. You can hand it out to your neighbors. We also have our EcoCycle A to Z app, which is new and very exciting. It is my full-time job for about my whole life to know what's recyclable, and I still use that app all the time. So it's just called EcoCycle A to Z, wherever you get your apps. You can call our front desk or email our front desk at recycle@ecocycle.org or 303-444-6634. We have folks ready to answer your questions. We just put out our 2021 holiday guide. We do it every year. And it's both like lifestyle kind of things to make the holidays more sustainable, but also specifically, what do I do with holiday specific materials like wrapping paper, string lights, things like that. And Zan touched on the State of Recycling and Composting report, which is something we're very proud of every year. We make things that are kind of timely that come up, like the packaging and mailer guide. Since so many folks were getting things through the mail during the pandemic and beyond, we made a guide of like which of the little mailers and packages that things come in are recyclable, compostable, hard to recycle, etc. We made a pocket guide to plastics to keep all the plastics straight. We have the EcoCycle guide, which is kind of a comprehensive booklet of all of these things. We have workbooks. We have much more. So just so you know, EcoCycle is ready to answer your questions. We have a lot of information and a lot of expertise to share. Zan, am I? Here, these are just our links. Become an eco leader. You can click this link and sign up. Become a carbon farmer. As I said, the pilot is over, but there are other options.
That was just our last slide.
Yeah,
so that's who we are. I'm going to quit sharing, and I know that was a lot at you, but we'd love to take your questions now.
I'll start just really quick with Claire's. Claire, I think we hadn't gone over this when you said this, but just to reiterate, Boulder's recycling rate is not so low. The stat that Zan initially quoted was Colorado's, which is the one that's 15. Boulder is at 53%, which is very good. And the national recycling rate is like 34, I think. And as Zan said, part of the reason that Colorado as a state is not very good at recycling is because out here in the West, we have so much land, we have so much room that our tipping fee, like the cost of landfilling is much lower. It's about half the national average. So that is the state answer. But Boulder is doing well for a lot of the reasons that Zan cited.
Okay. I'm trying to catch all these. Whoa, okay, let's see. How many garbage trucks do we have in Boulder? That's a great question. I don't know, although I saw Dale Eckhart was on the call. He probably does. I don't know, but it's a significant amount. Western has a whole stable of trucks. They do all the residential, most of the residential in Boulder. Okay, so I'm not sure I understand that question, but I think the savings would be significant if we moved all those trucks to electric and they were being fueled by solar or wind. Okay, Rosie, how do we change the world's economic growth models to economic sustainable models? And how might this affect climate change? That is the question, right? And we live in a capitalist society, which is based on growth. And the best we've come up with so far is to try to put sideboards on that and to try to internalize the externalities, right? One could look around at climate change and say it's not working well enough because the folks in power, the money is in power, and consumption is how we run the economy. So that is a fine question. I think it's going to take a transformation along the lines of what Naomi Klein has written about, and the only way we're going to really address climate change meaningfully, I think. Okay, you take one, Rosie.
I was just gonna say that Zan talks about big picture and I zoom in, and I was gonna say that like people think that the reason that we're using so much plastic is because of supply and demand, and if we just stop buying it, it would stop. But as we said, they're ramping it up as a way to make up for the lost oil and gas. And part of the reason that plastics are such a problem in the recycling world specifically is because there are subsidies for oil and gas drilling that other materials in a recycling stream don't have, so they're using recycled content. So getting rid of subsidies would be a very specific answer to that question.
Yes. We have a question from Karen, who lives in Pennsylvania, about working with rotaries. And I will say yes. We've worked with both of I think there's 2 Boulder rotaries, and one of them actually sponsored us bringing Blue Star Recycling on site here at Charm. Blue Star Recyclers, their mission is to provide jobs for folks along the autism spectrum, and recycling electronics is one of the ways that they do that. And so we said, well, hey, we're a social enterprise. We do this mission and this business-like activity in order to achieve a mission. We'd love to partner with you. So they are on site. So when you bring electronics to Charm, you will interact with Blue Star Recycler folks who will come out to your car and take your electronics and weigh them, and then they are disassembling and packaging them up for processing in our warehouse. So yes, love the rotaries, and I think that's an example of the many partnerships and collaborations that can happen around changing the system.
And when I talk to other people outside of Boulder County on building things like an eco-leader network to do a grassroots kind of approach, and Neighborhood Watch and Rotary are the 2 local organizations that are have so far been really successful in collaborating with. And then Zan, it looks like, did you see Jennifer Shriver's answer or question just
about grant writing? Yeah, we're supposed to email her.
Okay, great.
Great, we'll do that. So somebody asked, what type of facility is Western adding on 63rd Street? That's exciting. They just had their ribbon cutting. They greatly expanded their drop-off center for yard waste and lots of other things that they take there. But they've also added a C&D mixed waste line. It's a conveyor belt where they're going to sort. So when people bring a construction site has a dumpster full of stuff, they're going to bring it in there and they are going to sort it, both aggregates like asphalt and concrete, but also metals, cardboard, wood, some of the big things that you see at C&D. So that's one of the first, I think, mixed C&D sort lines around here, and that will be great and useful, I think, which also somebody else asked, what is Boulder County doing to reduce construction waste? We're not doing enough, but that is a step in the right direction. City of Boulder does have some, I'm going to blow it on this answer. They require deconstruction and recycling for some construction projects. I'm not sure if they're implemented or enforced as well as they'd like, but they're better than most anybody's around, and we need to build on them and expand. And the facility that Weston just stood up will be helpful in that regard.
Zan, I'm going to just jump in, if I may, and say, wow, this has been, and Rosie too, what a fantastic presentation. So much exciting stuff, and I can't wait to see the electric compostable truck. That's really, or not the compost, come up with a compostable truck. That actually would be cool too, but the electric compost truck pickup. We just want to be sure to honor your time and note that it's 7 o'clock. And so, totally understand that you are welcome to sign off when it makes sense. If you are willing to stay and hear some more questions, that's terrific also. But please also do let us know when that extended producer responsibility legislation or any other legislation is happening. We would love to activate our group and try to support that.
Excellent. We'll need you. You guys are some of the smarter minds around here, and I know you all are very engaged, and that's what it's going to take. So I think we can answer a few more questions, but before people leave, I just want to thank you again for having us. I think this collaboration is really important, and I think having all the solutions at the table, if we're going to solve climate change and resource depletion, we need all the oars in the water. So we appreciate zero waste being included in that.
Well, again, on behalf of Empower Our Future, thank you so much. We really appreciate having you here. And again, to hear your ideas, it really makes it exciting. And I think one of the biggest problems that many people have is not feeling like they know what to do. And you guys just served up a huge bunch of things that people can do. So really appreciate it. Thanks.
Absolutely. I saw one other question about Western and composting. And just so people are clear, Western used to have a compost yard over there on 63rd. And a lot of people think it's still there, and it's not. They grind up yard waste, and that's what you see sitting there. But they aren't actually composting anymore. They are a transfer station. So a lot of our trucks that do compost collections, we take them there, they dump them on the ground, and they put them in a bigger truck, and they cart them out to A1 Organics out in Keensburg. So yes, we have a good relationship with Western. However, they're not really composting anymore. So they are a transfer site, and they also mulch grind up the yard waste. So I hope that's clear. A lot of people think they're still composting in it, and I wish they were, but they're not. And that's why the county was proposing a new facility, because we don't have a local composting facility of any size anymore. Okay.
I typed one answer because someone said, how can we help private waste companies follow the same practices as EcoCycle? And I said, that's part of the reason that we founded the Alliance for Emission-Based Recyclers, to create those best practices and share them.
And raise the bar. I will say, locally, we have some good companies. And so Western is a good company, and they're fairly sustainable. Some of the larger ones, less so. Anyhow, and that's where the national conversation is, and that's where the transforming the system with extended producer responsibility, changing the rules so the companies have to comply, is kind of where we're headed. So I think that's it for questions that I see. By all means, feel free to contact me or Rosie if you have further questions. Our emails are easy: zan@ecocycle.org or rosie@ecocycle.org. And we really thank you all for being on Empower Hour with us.
Thank you so much. And again, thanks, Rosie, and thanks, Zan. Really appreciate all you do.
Likewise.
Likewise. Okay. Be well. Happy holidays.
You too.